Will the Lehman report result in civil and criminal prosecutions against the people who used to run the firm, including Dick Fuld? Well, John Hueston is a former lead prosecutor for the Enron trial of Ken Lay and Jeffrey Skilling. He is now a partner and co-chair of the corporate crisis and white-collar defense practice at law firm Irell Manella. And John joining us from Irvine, California. Thanks so much, John, for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so could this case, in fact, the situation, I should say, really become a criminal matter?
It has the potential to become a criminal matter. I think the bankruptcy examiner here, he's a former U.S. attorney, wrote a report with, I think, some aggressive conclusions. It's certainly more aggressive than the Enron bankruptcy examiner report, with words, terms like actionable balance sheet, manipulation, and claiming that certain statements were material and misleading, as well as discussing how Richard Fuld was at least grossly negligent. So this is, I think, red meat for prosecutors who might be looking for a trophy prize out of the so-called financial meltdown.
Okay, John, hang on, because I want to bring in John Erlichman, who's been following this case very closely.
Yeah, John, we had a chance also to speak with Mike Ramsey, of course, Ken Lay's former attorney. He thinks we will see criminal charges. As for the government, would it move ahead even if it didn't ultimately have the case that it wants, because there are still some unknowns here, to satisfy some of the public demands? That certainly is the impression we got from Mike Ramsey, that there's going to be so much public pressure to prosecute.
Right. Well, there's always public pressure, but I think internally within the government, there's also a lot of pressure to make sure that you're only going forward if you have a case that is solid and one that you're going to likely win. A case of this sort of profile would be a tremendous embarrassment if lost by the government. It represents years of investment of time and resources. So the government's going to very carefully review the documents and evidence. And here, the bankruptcy examiner is providing leads. It's providing certain distilled evidence. But this is not a roadmap to a criminal indictment. It is just a beginning.
But is it your impression then, John, that the bank examiner had written this with the eye towards seeing perhaps prosecution?
Well, I think the findings certainly provide, I think, a traditional predicate for an SEC suit, which of course comes with only civil penalties. I would be surprised if the SEC did not move forward with the evidence that has been given to them. They only have to win a case by a preponderance of the evidence. There aren't criminal implications, and I think that there's enough here to provide, I think, a fairly high likelihood that there will be SEC charges. Criminal charges are something different. For prosecutors, they want to see badges of fraud, things that will light a fire under a jury, self-dealing, maybe an effort by Richard Fuld to keep the accountants and lawyers from learning about certain facts, like about these repo 105s,
right.
Something beyond smelly accounting practices. That alone is not going to be enough to bring the prosecutors to the point of criminal indictment.
John, you mentioned repo 105s. In Enron, there was something related to the balance sheet that you might argue was somewhat similar, but it ultimately came down to what the auditors knew. How important is whatever the government gets from auditors going to be in terms of building this case?
Oh, well, it's huge. With the Enron case, we basically made a decision that we weren't going to prosecute for any accounting practices unless we saw evidence that something was hidden from the auditors. If the auditors come in and say, you know what, we looked at all aspects of this, and here you had Ernst & Young involved, and they blessed it, then there's no way there can be a criminal prosecution of the principals at Lehman, because they're going to say, look, we did all the right things. We brought in the outside accountants, the outside lawyers, blessed repo 105. It may be aggressive, it may be creative, but it's not criminal.